Okay, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have another podcast on Agflix, and we have Geert with us, and we're going to have an amazing conversation talking about open source. How beautiful is that? So, Geert, thanks for joining us. I'm going to introduce you to the people listening, watching and listening, and I'm happy. Actually, I just want to say thank you for joining us first.
You're welcome. Yeah, happy to be here.
And that for people watching, I have this funny story. When I met you, it was probably in 2015. So I invited you to give a talk at a meetup that I was organizing, and the meetup was in the church.
Yeah.
Like literally like an old church, and that was used by a company that was rented by a company. So in the Netherlands, you guys do that.
Yeah, it was actually quite interesting because what I remember of that talk is that like behind me was like a glass wall with like a cliff.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed.
Going way down, so you could actually look into the hall of the church down below. That was actually pretty nice. Very interesting.
Very interesting
venue,
setup.
Yeah.
I think the company was called Orange.
Global Orange.
Global Orange. Yeah. They had this crazy office in the church. Yeah, and I got to know you as a software engineer. And you're still a software engineer. You work today at Chroma, working full-time on an very popular open source project called Storybook. You love open source software.
For sure.
You even told me like, hey, I rather work on open source software versus a product that's gonna bring me money. I was like, really? You show me a beautiful app. I was like, just put it out there. It's like, no, I rather work on my open source project. And one of them, or the one you actually spend most of your time besides Storybook, it's React Async. So for people listening, you can't see it, but it's right there on his t-shirt, right? React Async.
I did my marketing part on that one.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. And you're a speaker, so you gave talk. You just your last talk was a few days ago in Eindhoven at a conference.
Actually, one more after that.
Really?
Yeah, just last week I did a talk at a meetup in Rotterdam. So this has been a busy month. Yeah,
okay.
I did 4 talks in 1 month.
Wow. I want to know how you manage your time to be able to put so much thing into your daily routine. I really want to know about that. And you work, something that I actually have to mention. I invited you to join the podcast before the podcast even started. I was like, I want to have that guy on the podcast, and I didn't have a plan on when this podcast gonna start. And finally, you made it. And back then, you were working at Zebia, in the Netherlands, obviously, and now you're working at Chroma. So I'm quite interested in knowing what your career has been about. What is your drive on daily basis to do whatever you do? So can you tell us more about you?
Of course. So I started in web development when I was back in high school. Really, I was back in the time that was around the time when internet was booming. People were building websites, and I had a hobby in Warhammer. A lot of people know that, 40K. And I wanted to build a website about that because I thought it was cool. Yeah. So I started out with Notepad and Dreamweaver mostly, dragging tables and putting spacer GIFs all over the place. Yeah. So that was actually pretty cool. And then I got involved fairly early with open source because at one point, just static websites isn't enough. You want to build dynamic stuff. So I ended up in the PHP world, like a lot of us. And I was looking for a content management system mostly to handle that. Or actually, I was into the forum software, like a lot of people were. Yeah. Forums used to be really big, and I wanted to build my own community, right? So I got involved with an open source content management system / forum software called Cotonti. Or Land Down Under. Yeah, there's not a lot of people who know about that one, but it was actually quite a big competitor to PHP Bulletin Board back in the like feature-wise. It was at least on par, and technically, I would say it was superior to it. So this was originally built by some French guy, and then a community group around that, and I got involved. And at some point, I was one of the core contributors to this PHP. Content management system or content management framework, as we eventually called it.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot of stuff.
The content management focused on like forums building or
yeah,
community?
So like it got out of the box with user management, admin panel, forum, things like a shout box, and all that kind of stuff. And it had a modular architecture like fairly early on, and you could skin it. So I was at first building templates for that, and later on building plugins, and eventually I actually built like the ORM for it, which is like that was actually my first entry into doing object-oriented PHP, because before that was like procedural. And I learned a lot of stuff from that, but that got me quite far. I did a whole bunch of freelance jobs mostly for startups in PHP, using that CMS, doing mostly like next to my studies. I was doing that, founded my own company in my second year in university, and went forward from that. So it's been a long time that I've actually doing like semi-professionally being in software development, like for over 10 years. Well, after studies, I decided, okay, I want to learn from people who have been in the industry for a long time already. So I decided to stop freelancing and to actually get a job at an IT agency, software development agency, where I learned Java, Ruby on Rails.
Yeah, you were doing a lot of backend stuff.
I've always been full stack. I have this relationship with software development where at one point I just decide that I want to switch to the other side, right? I've been doing front-end development for too long. It's time to do something else. And then I, for example, do Scala for 6 months. Right? So I've been doing Scala for a whole bunch of time, and then I get fed up with that again. I'm back at front-end. I would say I'm mostly front-end developer. That's where my real passion is. It's in front-end development. I just love building like really awesome web apps. That's my passion. The technology to do that, it doesn't really matter that much. Obviously, I fall in love with certain tools at some point in time. But for example, I was one of the early adopters of Angular JS in the Netherlands back in the day. And I was working at a company where I was the Angular JS guy, right? Even though I was only working for 6 months professionally. And I went from that. And actually, Angular JS was my ticket into Xebia. Where I worked for this one company for 2 years, and then I joined Xebia, and I had a lot of expertise in Angular JS. So that helped me get into Xebia, and from then, well, I landed in different projects like learning Scala, and I even did Clojure. Well, not at Xebia actually, but I did Clojure at one point, which is really interesting to learn all these various angles at like functional programming, object-oriented programming, and Scala, which is like a mixed bag and a pain in the ass. Eventually, at some point,
I felt like all the Java developers so badly want to do Scala. So
there was a trend, and I hopped on that bandwagon, and I also hopped off early enough. Luckily, early enough. Well, I don't really want to go into the issues with the Scala, but it's the community mostly, where there is two camps. You have the Java developers that happen to have learned Scala, and there's the Haskell developers who they want to write functors and monoids and all that stuff, and there's stuff just flying around, and I can't really follow that anymore. Right? Because I'm a pragmatic developer, and I I know a bit of category theory, but I really don't want to go in that too deeply because, to be honest, I don't really care about that stuff. I just want to build cool web applications that work well for the end user, and the way that you achieve that, I don't really care about that as much.
Okay. That's being pragmatic, like as you just said. It's because a lot of people will want to have all these fancy things shining all over, and just like, no, let's make it work. Let's make sure that the user has.
And there's a real balance there, obviously. I've been a consultant for 5 years while working in Xebia, and that is one of the topics that just keeps coming back.
Yeah.
And I guess I would say in 99% of the stuff that I've been doing for our customers, it's been over-engineered. Stuff gets over-engineered, and being more pragmatic is actually the better way to go.
Yeah,
that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that you have to forego things like testing, but you have to keep things simple. Keeping things simple it's something different. And actually, I love that quote. I'm not sure. It's like I think by Rich Hickey, the author of Closure. Simple versus easy. I don't know the exact quote, but like it's better to make something simple than to make something easy. Because easy it's basically you get lazy. Well, making something simple is really hard, right? It's very easy to make something very complicated.
Indeed, right? Indeed. Our brand, our software engineer brands, it just goes like, oh, I can do this, and then it just becomes completely like complex to handle for the end user at the end of the day. That's interesting. So you've always been passionate by like software engineering, being an open source engineer. But at what point? So you have this transition from like PHP content management system, and then you join that company to be to be with pro doing that work. Mm-hmm. Did you stop the open source work there, or is there any other open source you were involved in?
There was a point in time where I was doing a lot less open source work. Mm-hmm. I intentionally abandoned PHP fairly early on in my career. Like I think while working at that company, I did that because I recognized that, well, for one, PHP was at that point in time frowned upon a little bit by the pros. Mm-hmm. I would say nowadays they've got up with that, but there was a point in time where PHP was for the cowboys or the hobby developers, mm-hmm. and I wanted to be professional. So and Java was one of those languages that were considered to be the professional languages. But luckily, I joined the team that was doing Ruby on Rails, which is way more pragmatic, I would say, than anything that the Java world has ever done.
So you mean by pragmatic in the sense like...
As in building applications quickly, but still doing it right.
Yeah.
And I fell in love with Ruby on Rails. Not necessarily Ruby, but Ruby on Rails is like a really great software development platform, I would say. And, well, actually there's nowadays Laravel, which is very similar. And the ORM that I mentioned that I built for this content management system is actually modeled after Active Record from Ruby on Rails, right? Yeah. It all makes sense, like it all comes together in that way.
But what is the drive? Why? So what's the drive behind?
Well, I would say my personal drive has always been just personal development, like learning new things, getting better at stuff, and at one point when you're good enough at something, kill your darlings and move on, right? Do something different. I mean, I was heavily invested in this content management system, Cotanti, but I recognized that if I wanted to move on and learn more new things, I would have to abandon that and do something else. Yep. So I abandoned that and started doing AngularJS. And then later on, I abandoned AngularJS because Angular 2 came around, and I I figured like, oh, React is actually a way better model that actually, I mean, it's more fitting. It fits my approach to software engineering. Obviously, that was also kind of influenced by doing Clojure and Ruby on Rails, right? It's the functional programming. I understood the benefits of that fairly early on. So React made more sense as a model than Angular, where Angular like was fully on the object-oriented style. And I never, I mean, I understand the benefits of that, but I also see that it's not always the best approach, right?
Okay. So what I'm hearing now, it's like you have this idea of like, if I do something, I'm gonna do that like pretty well, and then at some point you fall into the comfort zone, and then you just like, okay, just leave that comfort zone. And so what is actually today, what is the either the new thing or the comfort zone you feel like you're settling into, if there is such a thing?
Yeah, that's actually a fairly good question. So I would say the comfort zone that I'm in is React, but that doesn't mean that I'm at a point where I'm willing to abandon it.
Okay.
For one, there is the React world is also evolving.
Yeah.
And
like crazy,
there's
like the last month.
Last year it's been crazy with all the new stuff like Suspense being announced first for efficiency stake and lazy loading your components.
Yeah.
Now it's also for data fetching, which obviously for React Async is very much on my radar.
Yeah.
I've been reading up on that like a lot. So there's plenty of stuff still to be learned and done. And also I am Chroma, the company I work for, we use React internally, and that's not going to change anytime soon. So it would be kind of silly of me to, for example, for all of a sudden start doing Vue.js or something else, because I wouldn't be able to apply that in my day-to-day job. And that's actually the biggest thing for me, is that the way I learn is by doing something in a day-to-day basis, and not like, I don't really believe in being able to learn something thoroughly without doing that as your job, right? You can learn something kind of on the side in your spare time, but that's only scratching the surface. You have to actually apply something in a real project for a real customer to truly learn the benefits and downsides of a certain tool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand that. So when we talk about open source, so I want to dive a little bit further in that. So you have 2 open source projects you're working on. One is just your will to share and grow a project you care about, and the other one, it's kind of the same thing, but you get paid like to do so.
It's slightly more complicated than that. I'm not in the same position as Norbert, for example, who basically works on Storybook full time in Chroma time. Essentially gets paid to do open source stuff. That doesn't apply to me per se. I do contribute to Storybook, but that's I'm more of a side contributor, I would say.
So tell us more about your role at Chroma, if you will.
Sure, yeah, of course. So I joined Chroma in July this year, so it's only fairly recent.
Yeah, it's been after about 5 years at the...
So I worked for Xebia for 5 years, and then I joined Chroma, basically by invite of Norbert, because I worked with him before. He also used to work with Xebia. And Chroma was looking to expand, and develop a new part of their product, or actually a completely new product, which is we now call it Chromatic 2.0, but it was called also Chroma for a while, and that's actually what I've been building for the last 6 months. So I was hired to work on the actual paid product that Chroma offers, and that's based on our tool called Chromatic.
Okay.
So Chromatic is a tool for visual regression testing. So essentially what it does, it takes your stories in your storybook, so it's all based on storybook, and takes screenshots of every commit, or actually every push that you do. So it takes screenshots and then it does a before and after comparison visually, pixel by pixel, and highlights the visual changes for you. So in that way, you are there's two parts to that. As a developer, when I change some CSS, for example, it's hard in code review, like on GitHub, it's very hard to mentally model the effect that this code change will have.
Yeah, you only see red and green, but you don't see much.
I know that the color of this button has been changed from red to green, but it doesn't show me all the places where this button is actually applied, right, where it lives. So that's what Chromatic does. And as a developer, it helps me to know for sure that the work that I've done is correct. And I was not used to this workflow before I joined Chroma, because I never used that product before. But obviously, we dog food our own software. Yeah. So ever since I joined Chroma, I've also been using Chromatic. And it's really been it's a big workflow change, and it's really for the better. I've really honestly enjoyed using that, and it's caught more than one bug that I like, a change that I did not intend. Let me give you an example of one thing that you could catch with Chromatic. It's like, say you have your button component, right? It's the obvious example, and you say you add some padding, some white space inside this button, which makes it a little bit bigger, a little wider. Yeah. Well, a button it never lives on its own. It's somewhere on a page, say in a header beside a search box or something like that. So say you have this one button component, but it's applied in 50 different places throughout your app. If you increase the padding of it, that will make it bigger, and that has the potential of wrapping text to the next line below it, because stuff doesn't fit within its container anymore, right? So that's something that is impossible to detect just by looking at the code. You have to look at the actual app to see that it's broken. But I'm not going to click through all of the various pages in the app every time I make a change, because it's way too much work, especially with something like a button which lives in 50 different places. I might check 20 of them, but I'm still gonna miss all the edge cases, right? So that's what Chromatic does. It just shows you the screenshot saying, hey, I just noticed that this text is now wrapped to the next line. You see that on your screen. You say approve or decline. So in this case, I'm just gonna decline that. I'm just gonna go back and to fix this in this scenario.
Okay, that's a very good way to
So that's the thing that's the product actually that Chromatic already had, or Chroma already had, for a couple of years now. And we're currently iterating on that, building a new product, or actually a new addition to this product, which is Visual Review, which is slightly different in that it's actually synonymous to code review by your peers. So it actually hooks into the GitHub pull request workflow, or Bitbucket or GitLab if you use that. And then shows you side-by-side comparison visually of your target branch against your pull request branch. Right? So that I still have this process of, as a developer, reviewing my own work and then fixing stuff before it goes into code review. But at some point, I say, okay, I'm done with this, and then I'm going to assign it to a peer to review it. And the nice thing about what we do is that we offer a platform for everyone involved in UI development. Okay. Because on GitHub, usually there's only software engineers on GitHub, maybe some testers, but not the designer or a product owner. And that's what we're changing with Chromatic, is that also designers and product owners are on the platform. I can assign a designer to review my visual change, the work that I did on my PR.
Interesting.
So they can actually approve it before it goes to production. The same thing goes with QA. Like if you have people to manually test the app, they can do a lot of that work before something has to be deployed to staging. So they are like part of the process of the software development process in an earlier stage, right? Well, before actually merging the code into master.
Master, yeah.
Right? Which is way better because it also makes for less disturbances. So because what you otherwise often see is what I'm used to in projects that I did for customers. I was part of a software engineering team. I would make a change, and maybe someone would look at the code and say, okay, let's merge it. And then it would be, well, if we're lucky, the designer or someone else would catch an issue in the staging environment. But more likely, it would just go into production at the end of the day, and it would be broken in production. And
what is the code? How do you? I'm just trying to wrap the Chromatic tool in my mind. Like, do you write code to hook it to your project, or is it just like configuration from GitHub, or how do you do that?
Yeah, so it's actually part of your continuous integration pipeline.
Okay.
So what we do, it's fully based on Storybook. We don't take snapshots of running applications, such as something that Cypress would do. We take screenshots of Storybook.
I understand already, yeah.
Which has the benefit that we can parallelize all of the work. So we can test 2,000 different stories in 45 seconds. You hook that into your CI pipeline. At one point, you build a static. You create a static build of your Storybook, which is something supported in Storybook by default. And then you upload that to our platform. And then we take all the screenshots of those stories and show you the results.
Okay, great.
And obviously give you like a check mark on your pull request, like the status badge.
So let's go back. When at some point when I introduced you, I said you're a trainer. You used to give training with Xebia.
Yeah.
And now you mentioned that you will be interested in giving more of some trainings here and there. Will Chromatic fit into the ecosystem of trainings you can
sure.
give to help people kind of?
So I used to be a trainer mostly, back in the day in Angular. I would do Angular trainings, and later I switched to React. So I gave several React trainings to various companies that we had as our customers. And so now that I left Xebia, I'm no longer doing that, but I'm still interested in giving trainings.
Okay.
Even though I'm full-time employed by Chroma, I have a passion for doing that.
Yeah. Sharing knowledge.
Actually, that's what I mean. That's the main reason why I'm on stage so often. Conferences.
Talking about sharing knowledge. You just mentioned like last month, November 2019. You did what? 4 talks?
Yeah. So 2 meetups, 1 conference, and 1 internal thing at Xebia.
So that's a lot of knowledge sharing.
Quite a lot of knowledge sharing. Yeah. I mean, I like doing that, and also as a trainer, it's exhausting, but it's also very
rewarding.
It's rewarding, and it's actually for me that's a way that I learn. It's the same thing applies to meetups, like talks that I do. When you're giving a talk or you're giving a training, you have to be very well prepared. So you have to go back and check your materials, right? So I can create a slide deck off the top of my head, but then I have to go back to the documentation of, say, React to see if that's actually still valid, right? I might have some knowledge in my mind that's maybe outdated, maybe it's not the recommended approach anymore, or it's not quite right. And then I learn to actually restructure my own thoughts on a particular subject. So that's, for me, actually a great way to learn.
Okay, interesting.
To expand my knowledge and solidify it.
Let me go back to open source world. So we talked about storybooks, and then I understand better your role at Chroma. But one of the main thing that I really want to dive into today is your T-shirt. So people don't. If you're listening, then you're missing out on this. So I want to talk about open source and React Async. Can you walk us through the story how you saw that problem, you start building something around that, and how it became, and now you just release a new version with TypeScript on top of it.
Yeah,
So
just this morning. Yeah,
just take us there.
for sure. Yeah, so React Async actually originates from an app that I built for Xebia, I think 2 years ago. At Xebia, they do regular knowledge sharing sessions. It's like a mini conference for colleagues amongst each other. So there's a lot of sessions and talks that you can attend. And I built an app that it's like a conference app. Everyone can create a new session with a subject and description and assign it to a room. And then people can attend or unattend, like RSVP to a particular session.
Yeah.
And I built a PWA to do that. We already had a Django-based system for that, but it was like fairly outdated, didn't really work on mobile. So PWA was a sensible thing. But there was an existing REST API. And I obviously wanted to use that, and I built this React PWA. I wanted to talk to a REST API. Well, how do you do that? Well, the obvious thing is to use the fetch API, right?
Yeah.
You just in the browser, do a fetch. But if you're doing a fetch with a React app, there's some edge cases that you need to consider. For example, if you request something multiple times, say you toggle the RSVP, if you do that, like you click that button 3 times, where am I going to end up? Because if you fire off 3 HTTP requests, then the order in which they return or even arrive at the server is basically random.
Indeed.
Right? You don't know. So what you need is something to handle this race condition. And cancellation obviously is the obvious way to do that, although there's multiple strategies. So I built that thing originally for this PWA for Xebia.
Yeah.
But I discovered that this is something that you can apply to any React application.
Yeah, indeed.
So I was later working at a customer in Gamma. They are known for the DIY stores, the Gamma and Karwei in the Netherlands. And we were building a React app for them. And obviously I had the same problem again. We had a legacy REST API that we wanted to talk to, and we needed some solution for that. So I extracted React Async from this PWA, made it a separate library, and started using that at the customer. And then, from there, it just like it grows and it becomes more mature. And I learned a lot of stuff about how you build an open source library, right? Because there's quite a few challenges involved with that. It's not as simple as extracting your code into a separate package and then just publishing it to NPM. Well, you can do that. A lot of people do that.
Yeah.
But what you end up with is something that's, not really tested, that doesn't cover a bunch of edge cases, that does not consider all the integrations that it has. If I do something, I want to do it right. So I decided that it had to be fairly top notch in quality wise.
Okay. So what is the talking about building an open source project? So you never really, it's just the issue was there, and then you start building on top of it. But then at some point you realize that other people might need this. You make it available to the world, and what happened? What is the process of like now managing this thing?
Yeah, so you mean as a community manager or something like that? Yeah. So the story there is that I've basically been building React Async for a year on my own mostly, and that takes you quite far, but if you really want to make something into a successful open source project, it basically has to be a community project.
Okay.
That's the thing. Actually, I learned that from Storybook. If you take the story of Storybook, Norbert has obviously told me that. It's like Norbert doesn't really build Storybook on his own and then releases it to the world to enjoy.
Yeah.
He is busy more by managing the community and encouraging other people to contribute and review and make that as easy as possible than actually doing the program itself. It's not really true because he still does a lot of programming because he can do this full time.
Yeah.
But for me, like doing this in my spare time, I decided over this summer to basically take a step back from building React Async itself and focusing more on developing the project rather than the product. So I moved it out of my personal GitHub account into a GitHub organization.
Okay.
It's called Acing Library after Kenzie Dodd's testing library. I essentially what I did is I contacted the authors of various libraries that are very similar to the one that I built, because especially with hooks. Now, when React hooks were introduced, everyone started to build their own hook for data fetching.
Yeah.
Like use fetch and use Axios and all that kind of things. And I was kind of annoyed by that because I'm like, this is solve problem, right? React Async solves this problem already.
Yeah.
Why is everyone building their own solution?
New one? Yeah.
I get why they do it because it's a great way to learn how to build hooks, right? And how to work with that. And so I get it. But so I essentially just contacted all the authors and got them all together. Obviously, some weren't really interested, but others were like, this is great. Let's come together and make this like the standard project for the standard tool for doing anything with promises. Basically in React. So that's been my aim, like my focus for the past, I would say 6 months.
So why moving it in a organization called Async Library while it was called React Async?
Yeah, so you have to decide on some naming, obviously, and at the time I was
because my when I saw it, to me I thought like you were opening literally the idea of React Async to any other.
That is the thought process.
Okay.
Yeah. So the idea there is that the problem of building web component, any kind of UI components with data fetching needs or any other asynchronous needs, that's a problem that applies to all of the front-end frameworks that are out there.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, some have a built-in solution for that. I mean, Angular has a whole lot of tooling to actually do that, so I don't suspect that there will be an Angular async based on Async Library. But for things like Vue and Svelte, there is plenty of space to do that.
Yeah.
So part of starting work on Async Library, choosing the name for one, is to actually extract the core business logic of React Async into a separate package called, well, it will eventually be called React Async Library Core. /core. With the idea that on top of that, we can build React hooks, React component, but also integrations with things like Redux, MobX, Vue, Svelte. Actually, I already designed the logos for Vue, like Async Vue and I mean Vue Async and Svelte Async. I already have the logos for that on my machine.
Okay,
it's just a different color.
Did you make the logo?
Yeah, I designed the logo myself. Yeah.
So just let me put it like that. So this is interesting. Just see it right here. You can see on the camera. Yeah, show it to the people.
Yeah, so I started with the React Async logo itself, and I designed it this way because it resembles a thread, where the process it takes it threads off from the main thread, right?
Yeah.
It forks the main thread, and then later on it comes back. So it's actually the light blue line that's below it that actually
and then
shows that idea of an asynchronous process that forks from the main thread.
Okay.
And later on
Interesting.
comes back.
See, now now I'm gonna see it differently every time that
that's
I now
the thought
have
process behind the shape of
Yeah.
the logo. And obviously I wanted something that looked pretty as well. So
Okay.
I threw in some gradients and fancy colors. I really love this.
Interesting.
And
So-
and Async Library, the A is it's a derivation of that, but it's actually quite fitting because it's plain enough that you can apply it to a whole range of tools.
Yeah. So today you just released a new version of React Async.
Just this morning I released version 10 of React Async. Version 10 is not really spectacular in the sense that it brings a lot new features.
Let me tell you this: it is spectacular because you introduce
TypeScript.
Yeah,
exactly. So that's the main thing that version 10 brings.
Okay.
Is it's basically built in TypeScript. In the past, I mean, personally, I'm more of a JavaScript developer, and obviously, I build React Async just in JavaScript.
Yeah.
Obviously, all the latest and greatest versions of flavor of JavaScript, but without types. And people started to ask about TypeScript support. Like, how can I integrate React Async in my TypeScript project? It's a perfectly valid question because people are using TypeScript. And I want to support that, obviously. So the first thing that you start to do is just write a typings file, right? If you want to support a TypeScript project with your JavaScript library, you write a types.d.ts file, which basically specifies the API, in TypeScript terms. But the issue with that is, I mean, it works, but the problem is that you have to maintain that type definition file as you make changes to the code itself. So the kind of way that I solved that is by basically creating a PR template on GitHub saying with a checkbox that says like, oh, I updated the type definitions, so that you don't forget to update it. Regardless, I forgot it on multiple occasions, and there were discrepancies between the actual implementation and the type definition. Like, for example, there was this property that it was defined as being a promise, but in practice it could be null as well, right? It could be undefined or a promise. Which is something that you forget about really quickly. And if you don't have TypeScript compiler to check that, you're gonna make that kind of mistake. So the thing is that in the end you end up having to maintain a type definition without getting any benefit out of TypeScript itself. You get the downsides, but not the benefits. Right? So it was actually kind of a no-brainer to eventually just go and build it in TypeScript itself. But that was great, a really great experience, because I didn't migrate it myself. We're two guys from Germany who I owe a lot to. Like, thank you guys for actually doing the work.
They're here.
They're over there. Thanks, guys. So these two guys from I think the company is called Mayflower, and they are using React Async, and they know about TypeScript, so they actually did all the work to migrate it to TypeScript, and then it was a great experience because there were some issues with the build pipeline. For example, we use a tool called Pika to actually build the package that we that we published to npm, and that was not it didn't really work out of the box immediately with TypeScript. There was some issue somewhere. So actually the author of Pika also jumped in and actually helped us to set up the pipeline the way it was supposed to. These German guys, they made a pull request on Pika to fix a bug in Pika itself, and eventually everything came together and we shipped it. And the most awesome thing is the only thing I did was do code review. On that whole thing.
So that takes me to my next question. Ups and downs of open source? If you were to kind of put it in a few words, what are the ups and downs of being in that open source there, managing a project, a community? How would you, what would you tell to people that wants to get into open source and yeah?
Well, getting into open source is actually, I would say it can be easy because there's so much work that you could do. It doesn't always have to involve code. I am very happy to take pull requests on documentation, for example, or I don't know, translations or simple fixes. But if you really want to jump into the code, I want to encourage that, and I love if people try it, and I will do my best to help them get their pull request over the line. I consider that my main job as like the maintainer of the project, right? If people do the work to improve something, but it isn't quite right? You have to help them to get it over the line.
Indeed.
Which can be tricky, but but recently I've been having conversations with people who were interested. I've been actively asking people to join and contribute to React Async. So some people have responded saying, "Hey, let's schedule a call to do some onboarding." So actually, just this morning, I had a call with someone from India because he was really interested to get started with open source. He's been doing front end development.
How do you get them rolling into the project? Like an issue or like just a task? You have a task management project?
To be honest, I am still trying to figure that out. Okay. Most people, they come into it by opening their own issue because they have some problem that they stumble upon and they fix it. Like they first open the issue and then I ask them, "Hey, can you at least give it a shot to fix it yourself?" And oftentimes they do, and they open a PR and they will fix the issue for them. But sometimes people have no idea. They want to contribute, but they don't know. And in that case, I just scheduling a call, talking about the roadmap and the ideas. And I always ask them, what's the thing that you would like to contribute to? Because I can't really go out and say you're going to have to do this chore and there's this chore. People don't like doing chores. They want to scratch their own itch, right? Or they want to work on something that's on their bucket list to learn. So I always want to ask them, okay, what's the thing that you would like to work on? And how can we make one-on-one, put one-on-one together and do, have you do something that's also useful to the project.
Yeah. Okay. I have a few more minutes, but I have tons of questions. So something that so you mentioned building that set of knowledge, then you're into a comfort zone, and then at some point you go outside of that to. How do you learn? How do you adapt to that ever-changing world of the tech world? Yeah.
Yeah, I that's it's always daunting. I can imagine mostly for people who are. I've been in software development for over 10 years, so I've seen quite a few things come and go, and you eventually learn to. Well, you see some patterns that helps you to gauge whether or not a new project is actually worth looking at.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that experience, everything might seem like the next best thing and something that you have to get into right away. Well, I would say don't actively. Well, I mean, you can actively get involved with that. That would be great. But in practice, you have to learn it on the job, essentially. Like I said it before, the best way to learn it is to apply it in a project.
Okay.
So actually...
Then you're going to have the project that says, oh, we want you to come with that that experience or that the knowledge. Probably at JBI it was quite okay because then they can introduce you here and there, and then
you do have to kind of get lucky with that. That's the downside.
That's also,
that oftentimes if you spend 2 years in the same project, after 6 months you kind of have most of the learnings, and it would actually be time for something new. I switched gigs like every 6 months. For at least early on in my career.
Okay, I see that. Let's apply that because you have the same issue with things like Storybook, because you need. I spoke with Norbert, who was working on it, and we were talking about how do you adapt to all these frameworks out there, because you need to support all these things. That's true. At some point, how do you cope with the changes in regardless of the framework? And he gave us some good tips there. So if you want to know more, check out the podcast with Norbert. That should be pretty nice. So you work remotely from Amersfoort.
Amersfoort, that's where I live.
In the Netherlands, And you have a family. You have one kid, and there is another one coming.
And that's right. So I'm actually expecting the second in 2 weeks' time.
Okay.
So it's I'm really looking forward to that. It's gonna be a girl this time. So
Daddy. So let me ask you this: how do you cope with family life as an open source contributor, open source engineer, and working remotely from home?
So there's actually one-on-one works really well together because working remotely gives you like pretty much endless flexibility in how you schedule your own time. Which is great because, well, for one, I don't have a commute. I have all the time to like bring my son to the daycare and pick him back up, things like that. Or I don't know, have a doctor's appointment in the middle of the day if necessary, things like that. You can just schedule that at any time. I will make my hours anyway because I often work in the evening, and that's also, I mean, that's fine because my son, he goes to bed at 7 p.m. Or 8 p.m., somewhere in between. And then after 8 p.m., I will have time to do some work. So some evenings I work, and other evenings I just crash on the couch with my girlfriend. But it's that's actually the where I basically find my time.
So, but then you might have a pretty good self-discipline in a way, because that requires to be well organized, or see what I'm saying there?
I wouldn't say I'm really that organized, but it has been a learning process over the past 6 months. I had to learn to do remote development because if you work in a regular, like your average company office, and you see your colleagues every day, you get away with a lot of the lazy communication, so to say, or not communicating at all, because it's balanced out by the conversations that you have at the coffee machine, for example, right? And looking over your shoulder saying, hey, are you still working on this or that? Or, hey, I just finished this. Can you take a look at my pull request? You have these very short lines where you can just quickly communicate. And if you work remotely, especially with various time zones, you have to be more consistent for one, and actually write it all down somewhere. That doesn't mean that I take notes or anything like that, but at least be aware that your colleague who wakes up in your evening, he's going to want some information from you. So I've learned to, for example, start my day by taking a look at stuff that has been assigned to me overnight. Right. While I was sleeping, they've been working, and in the morning there's a bunch of tasks like pull requests or issues waiting for me to take a look at. They mentioned me on Slack or something like that. There is a discussion I need to take part in. But so looking at pull requests that have been assigned to me is actually one of the first things that I do in the morning, so that I can handle all of those things before they wake up. Okay. So when they wake up, I have reviewed all their stuff and they can continue with their regular work, right? And I kind of expect the same thing the other way. So by the end of my day, I wrap something up, I push it, and then I assign, for example, the pull request to a colleague for them to review. And then most of the time, that thing will be reviewed the next morning.
Very good. And will you come back again and work as a full-time employee somewhere at a company? Well, not full-time employee, but on a project with
like in an office, right?
Office, yeah.
I'm still open to that. I'm not really. I mean, I'm not that sold on remote, like it being the holy grail or anything. I enjoy going to the office and seeing my colleagues. I actually kind of liked that, especially if you're in a team with people you enjoy working with. Then, I mean, working remotely can be a bit lonely. For me, it isn't really, but it can be. There's benefits and downsides to both types of working. I personally have, for example, never really had an issue with open offices, but other people have. So for me, it's not that much of a threshold to go back to your plain old office work.
Okay.
Then again, you get spoiled in working remotely.
I understand that. So we have we discuss a lot of points here. Really grateful that to hear the story of obviously React Async and your transition from Jabia to Chroma and obviously the storybook, because I had that thing in mind, like now Norbert was able to get his colleague, his friend on the Chroma, on the storybook full time.
It's something that we are actually evaluating still at Chroma, because right now we have like 2 people working full time on storybook and others working on Chromatic. Well, that kind of create. I mean, even though we are a good team, it does create a divide, right, between these 2 people and the rest of the group, and we don't want that. So it's actually we've been more actively involving Norbert in Chromatic work. He's been, for example, he built the GitHub action for Chromatic with Storybook integration, and I have been doing also some work on Storybook, and that's likely to be more like evenly spread, even though they will always obviously be the ones focused mostly on Storybook. We do integrate those 2 worlds more and more.
Understood. So before we end, I'm gonna ask you 1 or 2 more questions. So we have this thing at Hackflix where we ask Hackflix podcast, where we ask people, they do great stuff out there. They're trying to make things around them better. But we ask them if they have someone that inspired them out there, that inspired them to do good. If that person exists, would you be able to host the podcast sitting here and having that person cross table? So that's 2 questions.
Sure. Well, I mean, I can think of a few people who inspire me in mostly open source development. I guess the obvious one is Kent C. Dodds, because he is the author of Testing Library, which obviously I totally stole the name from for Async Library. Actually, I met him in person at React Amsterdam last year, where I was also giving a talk, and he was also giving a talk. And actually, since then he's been one of the big proponents for React Async. I explained the concept to him there at the conference, and he's been using React Async in his workshops
Nice.
since then.
Very good.
Which is like totally awesome. And obviously he's awesome anyway, so I would totally love to talk to him again face to face someday.
So,
sure. But
I need to talk to him. I need to tell him like Zara is coming for him. So Zara's gonna reach out to you whenever you're in Amsterdam, Ken.
React Summit.
React
I
Summit
think.
is going to be here.
Yeah,
It's probably
I think so.
in May, right? May,
Yeah,
April.
I think it's April.
So,
Yeah.
April. So
Actually, the whole Chroma team is coming over to React Summit. To join. Yeah.
Very good. So what we could do, we have this section called TMA, Teach Me Anything, under 10 minutes on Netflix, and we can do one with the Chroma team. I explain you more about it. The idea is like in 110 minutes, you go ahead and explain a topic like to people. So will be nice. But talking to Kenzie right now, Git wants to have you here on the podcast. We also want to have you here on the podcast. So join us here. Yeah, I met him in San Francisco a few years ago. He's a really cool guy. So yeah, we have it. Where could people find you online? Where are you online?
I would say the easiest way is to go to react-async.com,
Okay.
which is the website essentially it lands you on the GitHub page for React Async. You can find me there. On Twitter, I'm G Hengeveld, but I would suppose for a lot of people that's too hard.
Yeah.
So reactasync.com is the obvious place to look.
To look. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Pretty good. So thanks for coming again. You actually have the last words. Like, what would you tell people? Test your application often, or use React Async, or Storybook is awesome, or
well, I've learned that component-driven development is the way to go nowadays when building web applications, and I've really enjoyed building software to make that awesome. Chromatic is one of those. Storybook is another one of those. But really take a look at component-driven development with Storybook. That will definitely take your front-end development experience to the next level.
Cool. Thank you, people. We have it. So thanks yet again for coming, and hopefully, we get to see you here hosting a podcast with Kenzie Dutt.
I hope so, for sure. Yeah,
Thanks, man.
that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.